Well, hello there, darlings. It has been brought to my attention that although my name is Samuel the SP Chef, I haven't been doing a lot of chefing lately. And so, on the bequest of one of my subscribers, Fluffer Squirrel UK, I have now decided to do a little cooking tutorial. Today we will be doing tiramisu. Now, because I am going to do a recipe that I learned and that I did while I was working for Scientology as a SEOG member, and I worked for Scientology as a SEOG member, for everyone who doesn't know this actually, from 2005 until I left in 2012. And from 2008 until 2012, during this time I was working in the stables, which is where all the food has been cooked and served for the staff, and where also there is the staff canteen. And while I was there was a cook. His name was Antonino. He was from Sicily, and he had a wife. His wife was from either New Zealand or Australia, and then later on they left the SEOG and then they went to New Zealand or Australia. As I said, I don't recall anymore. And it must have been 2009, Valentines-day, where he decided, let's do tiramisu. And he actually dyed the tiramisu so that it is red. It was so red. It was like way too much. It almost looked unedible. It looked like plastic because it was so red, but it was so delicious. And he gave me this recipe, and he told me this recipe was from his grandmother. And in my cookbook, where I write down all the recipes that I gather, I actually titled it as Antonino's grandma's recipe. And so that is what we're going to do today. And because I'm doing now a recipe from during my time when I was working for Scientology in the SEOG, I'm naturally wearing my goldenrod yellow foulard. And because the SEOG is a paramilitary organization, I am wearing my captain's hat naturally. There you go. Instead of my usual chef's hat. Now, I am intending to do other cooking tutorials, specifically talking about technique and very basic recipes, rather than actually doing a cooking tutorial as such, but more about the technical aspect of cooking, because I think that is a little bit more interesting, because there are many channels that do recipes. But here on this channel, I will definitely do recipes that I did while I was working as a cook in the SEOG. So these are the ingredients that you will need. 4 medium eggs separated. You will need 500 grams or 17.6 ounces of mascarpone. Then originally you would need 180 grams or 6.3 ounces of sugar, of caster sugar. But I have now reduced it to 140 grams or 4.9 ounces of sugar. So the original recipe would have asked for more sugar, but I've reduced it now a bit because to me it was just a bit too sweet. Then we have 24 Italian finger biscuits. That's more or less what we will need. We'll see how much we'll need in the end. Then espresso, we need 500 milliliters, which will be about 17.6 ounces. And last but not least, we will add a sprinkle of salt, or as I like to call it, a sprinkle of suppression. That's right, we're going to add a little suppression to this dish, because suppression brings out a little bit of flavor in everything. Additionally to the ingredients, you will need 2 bowls, a rubber scraper, a conventional food mixer, and 2 of these dishes. Now each dish holds about 800 milliliters, which are 28.2 ounces. And I suspect we're going to fill both of them, so we'll have a look. I am planning to do a rather large amount of tiramisu. Alright, so first things first, we're going to take our egg yolks, we're going to add them to a dish. Alright, then the sugar. And now we're going to add a sprinkle of suppression. There we are. Good. Now we're going to take our food mixer. Good. So now we're going to mix this until the mixture becomes very fluffy and very light in color, almost white. Alright, this is it. Have a look. You see, it is very creamy. It is very light, quite fluffy, and it is almost white in color. So now what we're going to do, we're going to add our mascarpone to it. There we go. And now we're going to mix that in with the egg yolk, with the sugar, and a sprinkle of suppression naturally. Okay, so now that we've done that, our next step would be to beat the egg white. Now this is very important, very critical, that you clean your tools beforehand, because if you add fat or oil to the egg white when you want to mix them, they will not become as fluffy, they will not grow in the amount that there is in there because of the fat. So it's very important to clean your tools, and the egg yolk is fat. So naturally that would contaminate the egg yolk, and then it wouldn't become so fluffy and lovely. All right, so now the next step is the egg white. We're gonna add them to our bowl. There we are. And then we're gonna whisk them until they form soft peaks. Now you can over whisk eggs. What happens if you over whisk them? They become dry. That's how you call it. They become dry, and you will see that it will almost look like it's breaking apart. It really looks very dry. So you have to make sure to not overdo it. I will show you how when it starts to become a little hardened, and then what you need to watch out for to know now it's the right time to stop. By the way, another tip, make sure the eggs are at room temperature. So if you keep your eggs in the fridge, take them out in the morning so that when you make it later on in the morning or in the afternoon, that they are at room temperature, because then they will fluffen up much faster and much more efficiently. Okay, so now you can see it's starting to slowly form, but when you move the dish around, it sort of slides in there, which indicates to me that there's still some unwhisked egg yolk on the bottom of it. So we're gonna whisk a little bit longer. Good, so now we are done. As you can see, it doesn't slide around anymore in the bowl, it stays steady. And when you lift it up, it forms nice little peaks. So that's exactly what we want. This took me approximately now 2 minutes, so it really doesn't take a long time. All right, now we come to the next bit. Now we combine the two. We're gonna do what is called folding. So we're not gonna take a whisk and whisk it all in there, because when you do that, you're gonna ruin what you've just done, because you want to make it nice and fluffy, nice and airy, so it doesn't become as heavy and as thick. So that is why I use one of these. Now, you don't have to have one of these. A wooden spoon helps as well, but I like this because it has a bendy end to it, so I can really get into the bowl with it. So what we're gonna do now is add this heavy mass to the light mass. And now we're gonna gently fold. So literally we go in and we just turn. Turn like that until it is nicely blended. It doesn't have to be completely, because what we want to achieve is that it is a nice fluffy consistency. We want these air bubbles that we trapped now in the egg white to go into this heavy mass to make it not heavy, to make it nice and light and fluffy and lovely and absolutely marvelous. So we're almost there. Again, this doesn't take a long time. There we are, and we're already done. As you can see here already like bubbles building a little bit in between. You have little air bubbles, air pockets. This is all from the egg yolk. Well, from the egg yolk, some of it, but most of it from the egg white. So it keeps it nice and airy. Now, if you leave it like this, as it is, it will eventually disappear because the weight of it is too much. That's why we need to make layers of it, because then the weight between the layers, it isn't quite so heavy, because in between we'll put the biscuits, and that way we can keep most of the air bubbles and keep it nice and light. All right. All right, now to the next step. Now we're gonna create these layers. Now this is a very crucial part. This may sound very not so important, this detail, but it is very important. I'm gonna explain to you why. Now I've seen several ways of how people soak the finger biscuits with coffee. Some people like to put it in there, leave it for a few seconds and then take it out and put it in. Or they might even put it directly into the dish, maybe take a spoon and then spoon some of the coffee on top. Both ways are wrong, and I'm going to explain to you why. On the first way, when you leave it in for too long, it will completely soak up, and when you pick it up, it will fall apart, it will just be a mess in the dish, and it will be just too much coffee. It will have too much coffee in there. And the same if you just leave it there and then you put a spoonful of coffee on top of the biscuit. And this is the reason why when you then have the tiramisu and you cut into it and you want to eat it, you will find a whole bunch of watery mess on the bottom of it. It will be a bit of mascarpone with the coffee that is just on the bottom like this watery, very unattractive mess. So the way we're gonna do it is we're gonna just go into it and place it right away. We're not gonna wait at all. We're just gonna go right into it and place it right away. So we're gonna do our first layer like that. All right, so here we have our first layer. As you can see, there's no coffee on the bottom. I mean, there's obviously a few little drops here and there, but there's no coffee on the bottom. And right now, when you press with your finger, you might think, oh, it seems a little hard. But it takes no time until they have all soaked up the water of the coffee. But also, you have some liquid in the mascarpone mass. What I mean by that is the mascarpone mass obviously has liquid from the cheese itself, the mascarpone and the eggs, and that slowly will also be soaked in by the biscuit, which then makes the whole mass much more solid. It doesn't make it so watery, which of course is what we want. So now we're just gonna add our first layer. I'm just gonna gently spread it around. Just so that our finger biscuits are covered. Lovely. All right, let's do the second layer. Excellent. And now we're going to put our final layer of mascarpone mass on top of it. Oh, by the way, you can traditionally also put liquor into the coffee. Now, naturally, I didn't do that, or rather, we didn't do that when we were in the cirque because they would not have been allowed. But what you traditionally use is either, or actually combined, there's a liquor called Grand Marnier, which is made from oranges, and another one called Amaretti, which is made from almonds. And both of them are excellent. You can put them, you can put a bit of it into the coffee, but really just a shot, just to flavor. Whenever you work with alcohol, with brandy, with cognac, with Grand Marnier, with Amaretto in dessert, you always want to have it as a little flavor, as a little perfume, just a little bit to give a little bit of a flowery, nutty hint to it. Because if you put too much to it, it just is overwhelming. Because in this example, we are working with mascarpone, which is a cheese. It is a creamy cheese that has had not a long time to rest. The longer a cheese rests, the harder it becomes and the more flavorful it is. So the less it rests, the less flavorful it has. So you want to work with, if you work with alcohol, for example, something that's not too dominant, because otherwise you lose the subtle flavor of the mascarpone. All right, so now we are done so far. So we've done our final layer, and the only thing that's left is adding the cocoa powder. Now, some people might say you don't add the cocoa powder until you are actually about to eat. And by the way, when you make a tiramisu, you do not eat it on the same day because it needs time to settle down. You always make it 1 or even 2 days beforehand. Without a problem, you can keep it for 3 days, so you can even do it 3 days beforehand, but I usually do it 1 or 2 days beforehand, because if I were to eat it in 2 or 3 or 4 hours, the biscuits will not have had enough time to soak up the remaining liquids from the coffee that is still there and from the mascarpone mass, and so it would be the biscuits will be too hard. You want to make sure the biscuit had enough time to do the magic. And so you would always do it the day before. Now, what I was saying about the cocoa powder is that some people might say you'd only put it on top right before you're about to serve it. But I disagree. I think it is very important to actually put it right in the beginning. Right when you finished with it, you put it on top, because it will have had also time to soak up some of the moisture that is left in the mascarpone mass, and the flavor of the cocoa will have had some time to get into it as well. Right, let me tidy up the edges. Right, and there it is. And then what I would usually do is I will cover it with some plastic foil or cling film, and then on the following day, so tomorrow when I'm gonna serve it, just before I serve it, I'll check the cocoa. If the cocoa is, some of it has become a little bit of wet, I'll just add a little bit of new cocoa on top of it, and then that's that. So that's our first dish. We actually should have enough mass to do a second dish, so we're gonna do that first to make sure that it actually makes a second dish. Alright, so as we can see, I just managed to barely make 2 of these. Now, the keen watcher would have spotted that I struck it a little bit to actually manage to do the last layer on this one. So it is just about right. It just about is enough, and it is very slightly lower, you know, the height of it than the first one. But if I would have taken 1 spoon from there out and would have put it in there, it would have been just fine. So this measurement works quite well. The only thing we have a bit left is the coffee. I'm gonna guess maybe a third. It's about a third left of coffee that we have. There's not much you can really do with that because we did soak the finger biscuits in it. And if you would have added some liquor to it, some Grand Marnier or some Amaretto, then, you know, it's not much you can do with it apart from maybe make another cake with it. Or you can bottle it and then use it for the next time that you make tiramisu, but you're not going to be able to keep it for much for very long, maybe a week, 10 days, if you keep it in the fridge. If you're planning to do another tiramisu in the next few days, for example, then that's perfectly good to be used. All right, so I do hope you found that interesting and maybe even a little bit entertaining. So this is the tiramisu that I learned how to make when I was working for Scientology as a SIG member. And I learned this recipe around 2009 for Valentine's Day, as I mentioned. And this recipe I actually use still today when I make tiramisu. I've used this recipe in wonderful and high-end restaurants, and the response has always been very positive. The only thing that I changed now is that I have taken away some of the sugar. It's not quite as much as it was originally, but apart from that, it's exactly the same. And I love this recipe. This recipe works very well. And as you can see, it's a fairly quick recipe. It's not that difficult. And I do hope you found that interesting or entertaining. Do let me know if you'd like to see more of this kind of recipe, the recipes, the things I cooked during my time as the cook for the SIG member in Saint Hill in England. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, as one ought to. If you found this interesting, entertaining, educational, please consider subscribing. And I do wish you a most marvelous day. Goodbye.